Alright, you have heard me say time and time again that in law there are always three sides to the story. There's the plaintiff's side, there's the defendant's side, and then the truth usually finds itself to be somewhere in the middle. That's not to say that occasionally one side is not objectively more compelling than the other. Viva Frei, Montreal litigator turned YouTuber. I do these things called vlogs. You all know what they are by now. A couple of weeks ago, I did a breakdown of Marineland's lawsuit against someone named Phil Demers. For those of you who haven't seen that video yet, I'll link it right here. But just to give you the executive summary of that video and the Marineland lawsuit versus Phil Demers. Marineland, Canada, everybody knows what it is. It's in Niagara Falls, Ontario. Everyone loves Marineland. They know, probably the most successful jingle of all time. In 2013, they sued, among others, Phil Demers, who is a former animal trainer, animal caretaker, employee of Marineland. They sued Phil Demers, his girlfriend, the Toronto Star, a couple of other employees, and as relates to Phil Demers, they alleged a plot where he was conspiring to steal a walrus named Smooshi. Smooshi, for those of you who don't know, is a walrus that Marineland adopted at some point in time. Phil Demers was one of the primary persons responsible for caring for her, treating her, etc., etc. And apparently what happened is that Smooshi imprinted on Phil Demers at one point in time that attracted the attention of news outlets, reality shows, television shows, etc., etc. At some point in time near 2011-2012, Phil Demers resigned from Marineland because he could no longer stomach the treatment of the animals. He took issue with the treatment of the animals, according to him. Shortly after he resigned, he became an animal rights activist and vocal critic of Marineland and its treatment of the mammalian animal life in their facilities. At which point Marineland sued Phil Demers on the basis that he was conspiring to steal a walrus, no joke, that he was interfering with their business relationships, that he was trespassing, etc., etc. I broke down that lawsuit and said that in a subsequent video I would analyze Phil Demers' defense and cross-demand, because Phil Demers is countersuing Marineland for defamation, abuse of process. And today we are shooting on location from St. Stephen's, New Brunswick, with the beautiful river behind us and a lighthouse and wharf that is under construction, but this is the only quiet spot I could find away from the loving noises of family and friends while on vacation. Fresh as amended statement of defense and counterclaim. And that basically means that Phil Demers is defending against the initial lawsuit and counterclaiming with his own lawsuit. Overview. More than 5 years ago, Marineland commenced this suit along with a series of proceedings against activists and journalists critical of the park's treatment of animals, as particularized herein. Marineland has attempted to silence its critics using the court system. I like this. Although there are in fact two allegations in one paragraph, which becomes difficult to prove and deal with in court, I still like this. They are laying the framework for what is going to be the counterclaim for abuse of process by Marineland to silence Demers and any and all critics of Marineland. Paragraph 3 and following, we have a summary of events. They describe who Phil Demers is. They describe who John Holler is. Phil Demers, for anybody who doesn't know, is the former employee being sued by Marineland. John Holler, now deceased, was the founder of Marineland and by all accounts the mastermind behind all of the conduct alleged against Marineland by Phil Demers, but we'll get into that. The totality of Marineland's conduct as described herein exposes this litigation. Let's just wait for that beeping to stop. The totality of Marineland's conduct, as described herein, exposes this litigation for what it is, an abuse of the court's process and an improper effort to silence, intimidate, and injure Demers. It is respectfully submitted that Marineland's actions should be dismissed and its abusive conduct should be sanctioned by the court. Clear, concise, to the point. This is what they're alleging, this is what they're going to get at in their proceedings, and after having read the complaint and the defense and counterclaim, my opinion is irrelevant, but you shall come to your own opinion as to whose story carries a little more credibility in the grand scheme of this litigation. Paragraph 6, in March 2000, Demers was hired by Marineland as an assistant marine mammal trainer. And then we get into the story of Smooshi the walrus. In 2004, Marineland acquired a young Pacific walrus named Smooshi. Shortly after Smooshi arrived at Marineland, her health deteriorated and she began to suffer from tusk infections, abscesses, and would refuse to eat. Demers invested considerable time and energy to improve Smooshi's health. As a result of Demers' efforts, supplemented by the efforts of the other Marineland employees, Smooshi's health eventually improved. Shortly thereafter, Demers became Smooshi's primary trainer and was heavily involved in caring for her. Marineland approved and encouraged Demers' efforts and growing relationship with Smooshi. Makes sense. Demers' relationship with Smooshi became the subject of considerable interest to the media in 2007 and 2008, and with the approval and encouragement of Marineland and its owners and controlling mind, Holler, numerous news articles and television clips were generated. In an attempt to profit from this media coverage, Holler's son proposed to his father that t-shirts be made and sold, and a small number of shirts were made, including one given to Demers as a gift. All of this makes perfect sense. Marineland is a business. It's in business to make money. One of the ways to make money is to have these amazing stories of relationships between trainers and their animals, especially given the unique relationship or unique behavior engaged in by Smooshi strictly because of her close relationship with Phil Demers. In 2008, Smooshi was moved from Marineland's barn to the aquarium. How's it going? Problems with the aquarium's water quality resulted in Smooshi's health deteriorating. Demers successfully lobbied his supervisors at Marineland to return Smooshi to the barn, and her health improved. And then we get into the whole description of the health problems affecting Smooshi as a result of the way Marineland was caring for her. And this is sort of what leads to the problem itself of Phil Demers becoming something of an internal problem employee, as they allege in the proceedings, where he was constantly struggling with administration as relates to proper care for Smooshi. And at paragraph 13 and following, we get into the fact that in 2011, Phil Demers was actually on a show called Wipeout Canada, and he in fact won the episode that he was on and won $50,000 as a result. And on Wipeout Canada, they talked about the fact that Phil Demers had this unique relationship with the walrus. It was sort of like the story behind the individual to get people personally connected to Phil Demers as a human. And as a result of it being on Wipeout Canada, it got sort of national attention and then became the object of further interest from the media. Paragraph 14. About a month after the initial airing of Wipeout Canada, Demers was approached by an Ottawa-based production company named Mountain Road Productions to inquire as to his interest in starring in a television show. And then we get into the fact that Mountain Road Productions, or MRP as they're defined in the proceedings, approached Marineland with the idea of doing a reality show, and at first Marineland was in fact interested in the idea. And why wouldn't they be? It's amazing free publicity. And even before reading the paragraph, I said to myself, John Holler must not know exactly what goes on when a reality show comes and decides to shoot on premises. They get to see everything, they get insights into everything, good and bad. And maybe Marineland might not necessarily want a reality TV show documenting on Marineland property where they might see things that some people might consider objectionable. And lo and behold, this is pretty much exactly where the story goes, as detailed at paragraph 16. In August 2011, one of Marineland's senior employees and MRP continued discussions concerning a potential show filmed at Marineland and the potential profits to be made from merchandise and other spin-offs. Demers was aware of but not involved in these discussions, which makes sense because Demers is an employee of Marineland, not a principal or an executive who would have a role in negotiating whether or not this show actually takes place on Marineland property with Marineland. And then we get into the wholly predictable turn of events. Holler subsequently declined to authorize Marineland to participate in the television series because he was concerned that they just want to know our secrets. That's potentially one way of saying we don't want to disclose our secrets to them, and not secrets like trade secrets, potentially like what goes on behind the scenes with the animals, the treatment of the animals, the living conditions of the animals. It's nice to have animals come out and do cute tricks for crowds, but it's another thing to let a production company on site to actually see what goes on behind closed doors. This might not be information that you want to disclose to a production company for the purposes of a reality show. The lawsuit goes on to describe that Smooshi's health was deteriorating, Phil Demers became increasingly concerned about it, that he became regarded as a problem employee to Marineland, he kept on having confrontations with John Holler, the principal mastermind of all of this business, and in 2012 Demers makes the difficult decision to leave Marineland and leave Smooshi. Paragraph 20 and following, we describe the fact that once Phil Demers left, it was sort of understood that he would be able to go back periodically or as often as needed to visit Smooshi given his close relationship with her, and then it's further alleged that when he went back on site, he saw that her health had deteriorated to a point where she was losing weight, looked totally ill. People didn't want to let him see Smooshi because he was going to be so upset by her condition. Alright, it seems that there's a very big, loud engine. What's going on here? Let's see what this is. What is this? Okay, something's going on. Something's going on. All right, that's definitely not something you see every day. All right, so after Demers leaves, protests begin to erupt outside Marineland as relates to Marineland's treatment of the animals. The defense and counterclaim alleges that as of August 2012, the Toronto Star begins to publish a series of articles critical of Marineland, and that the protest sort of snowballs into something much bigger. At paragraph 27, it's alleged that as a result of the articles published in the Toronto Star, a number of investigations into Marineland are launched. And here's where we have the two stories sort of coinciding, and you can sort of pick which one you think is more plausible than the other. Marineland alleges that it's Phil Demers who instigated all of these investigations into Marineland. Phil Demers is saying it wasn't him, he had nothing to do with it, it was as a result of these articles published in the Toronto Star that various investigation into Marineland's treatment of its animals began. It's up to you to pick which version of the story you think is more plausible. And at paragraph 30 and following, we get into the fact that in 2012 there are various protests outside Marineland, and the fact that Phil Demers is present at one of these protests confirms in the mind of John Holler that he is responsible for all of Marineland's troubles and problems. According to Phil Demers, in John Holler's mind, Phil Demers is the reason why all of these bad things are happening to Marineland. Demers alleges that Marineland published various defamatory articles, made various defamatory statements. I think the car is across the river now. As a result of which Demers has suffered certain damages to his reputation. Paragraph 40 I love. It's not something we see in Quebec law, but I know exactly what it means. Demers denies that he committed the torts of trespass, intimidation, and intentional interference with economic relations, whether in the manner described in the amended statement of claim or at all, and puts Marineland to strict proof thereof. I love it. Phil Demers is not only saying it's not true, he's saying I dare you, Marineland, to prove it. And not only do I dare you, I put you to task to prove it. You made a bunch of statements, prove them now. And I like it because it's a sign of strength and confidence. It's not just a mere denial. None of this is true. It's more like, dude, you made false and defamatory statements about me. I don't want this to go anywhere else but court, and I defy you to prove that what you said about me is true. Go ahead. Here's your day. Do it. I dare you. And we have these two diametrically opposing, competing narratives of what actually occurred. Rashomon. Marineland alleges that Phil Demers was a glory hog. He wanted the fame, he wanted the star status, and when Marineland said no to this, he quit and he went on a vendetta to bring down the Marineland machine. Phil Demers' version is that he was hired by Marineland. He saw things that he didn't like. He developed a particularly meaningful relationship with the walrus named Smooshi. And when he saw bad things happening to her in terms of health, he took issue with it. He raised his concerns to Marineland, and when they said, no, tough noogies, we're not doing anything about it because it costs too much or it'll come out of our bottom line, he said, I have no choice but to leave. But even in leaving, I would still like to maintain my relationship with Smooshi, come to see her for her own benefit. And it was only after Marineland failed to respect their end of the agreement that Phil Demers became a vocal activist and critic of Marineland and its treatment of their animals. But I do kind of want to highlight what I feel to be the absurdity of Marineland's claim that Phil Demers was planning on kidnapping a walrus, a 1,300-pound walrus. When I read those allegations, my mind immediately flashed to Ace Ventura: Pet Detective when they kidnapped the dolphin. How in the hell do you lose a 500-pound fish? How in the hell do you kidnap a 1,300-pound walrus that requires cool environment, snow, water? I mean, how do you do it? What do you think you do? How do you do something like that without killing the walrus? Or is Marineland actually suggesting that Phil Demers was ready to kidnap and kill Smooshi the walrus to raise awareness for the mistreatment of animals at Marineland? Between the two versions of events, one is grossly more probable than the other, but the truth is probably still going to be somewhere in the middle. It's just going to be a question of whether or not it's vastly on the end of the spectrum of Phil Demers' claim. But we haven't even gotten into the counterclaim yet. Let's get into the counterclaim. Paragraph 50 and following, Phil Demers is suing for $1 million for damages and abusive process. Abusive process is an interesting thing. It requires a party to deliberately and grossly abuse of the judicial process for nefarious or ulterior reasons. It's incredibly difficult to prove, at least in Quebec, and very rarely, at least in Quebec, does anyone get their legal fees back for abusive process. It has to be such egregious abusive process, and the example I typically use is the landlord who's trying to evict a tenant, and the tenant won't leave, so then they take the matter to court, but that still doesn't work, so what they end up doing is like putting dead fish between the walls to make such a stink, no pun intended, that the tenant has to leave. That's the type of abusive process that can be sanctioned by the court, at least in Quebec. Or it's when you use every recourse in the court system in an unnecessary and exaggerated manner strictly for the purposes of harming your adversary. Phil Demers is suing for abusive process. If I had to make a prediction based on my perspective as a Quebec attorney, I would say he may not succeed on the claim for abusive process, but I haven't been involved in the 6 years of legal drama and saga that has engulfed and consumed Phil Demers' life since these proceedings were filed in 2013. Paragraph 52 and following, we talk more about the defamation by Marineland against Phil Demers. And at paragraph 59, we talk about the abusive process by Marineland against Demers. In addition to the foregoing, Demers pleads that Marineland's conduct in commencing parallel litigation against Santos, his girlfriend, activists known to him, and journalists who report on him and Marineland is part of a pattern of behavior intended to intimidate him and create a chilling effect on lawful criticism of the park. This litigation includes, and we have a list of the other lawsuits commenced by Marineland against others, and there seem to be 5 of them. And Marineland's abusive process is not strictly limited to the court proceedings. In the suit, it's alleged that they also filed suit against Christine Santos, who is Phil Demers' girlfriend and also a former employee of Marineland, and they allege that she stole the keys from Marineland, and they actually got the police involved, alleging theft of the keys. As a lawyer, this reeks of fabrication. If someone steals keys from your premises, the first thing you do is change the locks. You don't file police reports for theft of keys. And it's also very easy to get the keys back and make that a relatively formal process before firing someone. And Marineland's abuse of the non-judicial process goes even further than that. Apparently they called the police on Phil Demers as a result of one of the tweets that he recently made to the effect of "life is short, steal a walrus," which they took as a threat to steal a walrus, and called the police to investigate Phil Demers' tweet, "life is short, steal a walrus." Regardless, we're going to get into those details and other details in much greater detail on August 18th at 1 o'clock when we do the live stream with Phil Demers. Be sure to tune in. It's going to be amazing. I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope you now know a little bit more of the Marineland, Demers, and other lawsuits. It's a very interesting lawsuit, especially since if we take Phil Demers at his word for what he said on the podcast with Joe Rogan, he wants to go to court on this. He wants his day in court. He wants to live with whatever judgment a judge is going to render because that's how confident he is in his position. And having listened to him on Joe Rogan, I don't think this matter is going to settle. I think this matter is going to go to court. Once there is a cross demand, even if the plaintiff drops their initial claim, the cross demand goes to trial. And as relates to the abusive process, it is very interesting that Marineland has filed multiple contemporaneous lawsuits on similar allegations against multiple parties. I was once involved in a lawsuit with what can only be described as a highly litigious party, and we wanted to make evidence as to how the plaintiff was abusing of the judicial process as a modus operandi in life and in business. And we pulled out the court docket information, which showed that the plaintiff had something like 150 active suits going on over the last 10 years in order to establish that the plaintiff was yet again abusing of the judicial process as a bargaining tool, as a negotiating tool, as a pressure tactic in negotiations. All right, and that is both sides of the Marineland story. You know both of them. You can come to your own conclusions as to which is more plausible and where the truth may lie. Be sure to tune in for the live stream, and now you know your vlog. Peace out. Boom!